If you saw a dog trembling in a corner, ignored by everyone at a livestock auction, would you stop to look or walk away like the rest? That's the question that lingered in Luke's mind the moment his eyes met the matted, broken creature at the far end of the pen. The place reeked of sweat and mud, and the noise of shouting bidders filled the air like a storm. Most were there for cattle or workhorses, but tucked in the shadows was a thin, patchy-furred dog, curled into himself as if trying to disappear. He wasn't barking or wagging his tail. He wasn't even making eye contact. Just trembling, almost invisible, almost gone. And yet, something about him pulled at Luke's chest like a string he didn't know was attached to his heart. Luke hadn't planned on stopping at the auction that day. He was only passing through the small Texas town after another failed job interview. 26, freshly laid off from a warehouse gig, and carrying the weight of his late father's debts, Luke was restless and angry with life. Everything felt stuck. He'd sold his tools, let go of his apartment, and was now sleeping in the back of his pickup. Every gas station coffee tasted like defeat. Every town looked the same. But something about the faded sign for Turner County Livestock and Equipment Auction made him turn off the highway. Maybe he just wanted to see life moving, even if it was cattle and horses. Maybe he just wanted to feel something. The inside of the auction barn was chaos wrapped in denim. Men haggled over bulls, kids tugged at their mothers' sleeves, sticky with soda. The sound of clanging gates and stomping hooves echoed off the tin roof. Luke kept his hands in his jacket pockets, drifting through the barn like a ghost. That's when he saw the pen marked miscellaneous, broken crates, bent cages, and inside, one dog. A mutt, maybe part shepherd, maybe part something else entirely, but so thin his ribs looked like they might cut through his skin. No tag, no name, no chance. He was filthy coated in dried mud and what looked like oil. One of his ears hung lower than the other, and his back leg trembled with each breath. But it was his eyes that hit Luke the hardest. They were the kind of eyes you didn't forget, clouded, yellowing, and yet wide open with something ancient inside. Not fear, not even hope, just resignation. The look of a creature who had been passed over too many times to believe this moment would be different. Luke stood there longer than he meant to. He watched 3 people walk past the pen without stopping. One man laughed and said, "That one's done for." Another muttered, "Ain't no use saving 'em all." Luke wanted to look away. He wanted to shake off the feeling starting to swell in his chest, like grief and fury rolled together. But he couldn't. He hadn't saved anything in years, not a job, not a friendship, not himself. And yet, something about this dog made him believe he still could. A voice crackled over the loudspeaker, announcing the next lot. The pen gate creaked open, and a worker yanked the dog forward by a frayed rope. The dog stumbled, his legs splaying under him like he hadn't walked in days. The auctioneer smirked and said, $1 start, if anyone wants the trash." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone offered a quarter, just to be funny. Luke's throat tightened. He felt his jaw clench. He didn't even realize his hand was raising until the words left his mouth. $1, Luke said, louder than he expected. The room quieted for a beat, surprised someone had actually bid seriously. The auctioneer looked amused. "We got $1, he said. "Anyone want to make it 2? No one did. The silence was sharp, almost shameful. The hammer came down with a dusty thud. "Sold. $1. To the young man in the back, Luke didn't feel triumphant. He felt like he'd just made a promise he didn't fully understand. He approached the pen, heart pounding in his chest. The dog didn't look up, didn't move. Just lay in the dirt, as if he didn't believe freedom was real. Luke crouched down slowly, trying not to spook him. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "You're coming with me now." The words felt strange in his mouth, like he was saying them to himself just as much as the animal. For a second, the dog's ear twitched. Barely. Luke lifted the dog gently into his arms, surprised by how light he was. Bones and skin barely held together. He felt the rise and fall of the dog's breath, shallow and unsure. And then, as he walked past the crowd, something happened that stopped him cold. The dog let out a faint, broken sound. Not quite a whimper, not quite a cry, just enough to say, "I'm still here." And in that moment, Luke knew everything had changed, even if he didn't know how yet. The drive back to the edge of town was silent except for the rattling of old tools in the back of Luke's truck. He'd wrapped the dog in his only clean hoodie, cradling him on the passenger seat like a fragile piece of history. Dust floated in the evening light as they rolled past shuttered gas stations and broken-down motels. Luke didn't know where he was going, just away from the noise, away from the people who laughed. He needed time to think. The dog hadn't made another sound, but he watched Luke now, blinking slow, as if trying to decide whether he was dreaming. Luke pulled off the main road near an old campground, mostly abandoned this time of year. A rusted picnic table sat under a crooked pine tree, and beyond it, a quiet patch of woods. It wasn't much, but it would do for tonight. He laid a blanket on the truck bed and gently placed the dog down, unsure of what he needed more: rest, food, or a miracle. The dog's body shuddered with each breath, as if every second alive was an effort. Luke crouched beside him, feeling helpless. "You got a name?" he asked softly. "No." "Me neither, really." He remembered the box of canned beans he kept under the seat. It wasn't dog food, but it was something. He spooned a bit onto a plate and set it near the dog's nose. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, with a trembling movement, the dog sniffed, licked, ate, slowly, like every bite hurt, but he kept eating. Luke exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. "That's it," he said. "That's it, buddy. You're still fighting." He didn't realize his eyes were wet until he wiped them on his sleeve. Night fell heavy and cold. Luke didn't sleep much, afraid the dog might stop breathing at any moment. He lay curled near him in the truck bed, wrapped in both their jackets, feeling more human than he had in months. The stars above were quiet, indifferent. But down here, in this forgotten patch of earth, something fragile and sacred had started to grow, a connection, a thread. And in the silence, Luke whispered something he hadn't said in a long time. "You're not alone anymore." The next morning came gray and damp, with a low fog hanging over the trees. Luke stirred first, his joints aching from the cold. Beside him, the dog still lay curled tight, but when Luke moved, so did he. A slow stretch, a soft grunt, and then, as if testing the idea of movement, the dog stood. Wobbly, uncertain, but upright. Luke sat up, startled. "Well, look at you," he said, a smile cracking through the exhaustion. "You got some fight left, after all." He took a photo with his old phone, just a blurry shot of the dog standing on the blanket, ribs poking through fur, eyes still guarded. He didn't know why he took it. Maybe to remember this moment. Maybe to prove to himself it was real. As the morning unfolded, Luke made a small fire and heated some oatmeal. The dog didn't eat much more, but he stayed closer than Luke expected, as if the rope had reversed direction, as if the dog had started to tether himself to Luke. They stayed at the campsite to more nights. Luke used the time to clean the dog gently with warm water from a jug, dabbing off grime and checking for wounds. Under the filth were old scars, some healed, some fresh. It was hard to tell what hurt more, the injuries or the life behind them. Luke spoke little, just soft murmurs and nonsense words. But the dog listened. He listened like it mattered. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. On the third day, Luke gave the dog a name. It came out of nowhere, like a memory that wasn't his. "Shadow," he said. "That's your name. You don't gotta be invisible anymore." The dog didn't react right away. But that night, when Luke whispered the name again, something shifted. A faint tail wag, a barely there flicker in those tired eyes. As if the word shadow had reached a part of him still alive beneath all the numbness. Luke held onto that, but reality was waiting just down the road. Luke had almost no money left, and Shadow needed real care, a vet, medication, maybe surgery. There was no way around it. They couldn't stay in the woods forever. The thought terrified him. For the first time in a long time, he had something to lose, something worth protecting. And as he packed up camp and loaded Shadow gently back into the truck, a new question burned in his chest. How do you save something when the world doesn't think it's worth saving? As they drove back toward town, Luke spotted a small animal clinic by the highway. The sign said open Sundays. His heart pounded. He didn't have much. Maybe enough for an exam, maybe not, but he had to try. He glanced at Shadow, who now sat up on the seat, watching the road. His posture was different now, still cautious, but alert, present. Luke pulled into the lot and parked. He took a deep breath. "Buddy," he said. Let's see if the world's got room for two strays like us. Then he opened the door, and the two of them walked in, side by side. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and wet fur. A wind chime on the door announced their arrival, but no one looked up right away. A woman at the front desk typed something on a computer, and a fluffy golden retriever panted happily in the corner, clearly just coming from a checkup. Shadow froze in the doorway, his paws spread wide on the tile floor, his legs stiff. Luke knelt beside him. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe now." But he knew this was the hardest part. Trusting strangers, letting someone else touch the pain. The receptionist looked up and blinked. Her eyes landed on Shadow, and for a moment, her fingers stopped moving. Luke stepped forward. "Hey, I found him. Bought him. At an auction. He's not, well," he didn't know how to explain it. The woman's expression softened, and she stood. "Dr. Elkins is in," she said gently. "Let me see if she's available." Luke nodded, cradling Shadow's body against his leg. The retriever in the corner gave a low tail wag, but Shadow didn't move, still frozen, still ready to disappear. Minutes later, a tall woman in scrubs appeared through a back door. Her face was lined with years of emotion, some joy, some pain, but her eyes were steady and kind. She crouched to Shadow's level immediately, not looking at Luke at first. "You poor boy," she said softly. "You've been through the fire, haven't you?" Her voice was like a bomb. Shadow didn't flinch, but his breathing quickened. She didn't reach out. She just let him look at her, smelled the air. After a moment, she nodded to Luke. "Bring him back." The exam room was small and clean, with posters of smiling dogs on the walls. Luke lifted Shadow onto the table as carefully as he could. Dr. Elkins moved slow, speaking in low tones as she examined him. "He's severely underweight, old injuries, some healed wrong. You see this scar along the ribs? That's likely from neglect. Maybe abuse, and the back leg, nerve damage. Could be permanent." She glanced at Luke. "Did you say you got him at an auction?" He nodded. $1, he said. "That's what he cost." She didn't smile, she just sighed. "There's a lot more than $1's worth of pain in him." She turned to the cabinet, pulled out a syringe. "We'll start with fluids, blood work, and he needs antibiotics, probably deworming too. It's a list." Luke's stomach turned. "How much?" he asked. She hesitated. "If we do it right. Maybe $600-700, more if he needs surgery later." Luke looked down at his boots. He had $89 to his name and a truck that needed gas. He nodded slowly, jaw clenched. "Do what you can with what I've got." She paused, then looked him in the eyes. "I've seen a lot of people dump animals because they couldn't afford to keep them alive. You're not one of them, are you?" Luke shook his head. "No, ma'am. I don't got much, but I don't walk away." Something in his voice made her believe him. She placed a hand on Shadow's side, where the fur had been shaved for the IV. "All right," she said. "We'll start small. Let's stabilize him. And we'll figure out the rest together." Luke spent the next 2 hours in the waiting room, staring at the scuffed linoleum floor. Every few minutes, a sound from the back made him flinch. He felt like a fraud, a broke drifter playing savior. But at the same time, something stubborn held him in that chair. Shadow had let him in just a little, and Luke wasn't going to let that trust die under fluorescent lights. When Dr. Elkins returned, her scrubs were stained and her eyes were tired. But she was smiling. "He's sleeping now," she said. "Took the fluids like a champ. Temperature's coming down. He's not out of the woods, but he's trying." "That's more than I expected from a dog in his shape." Luke stood, trying not to show the wave of relief that hit him. "Can I see him?" She nodded. "Just for a minute. He needs rest." In the exam room, Shadow lay wrapped in a blanket, connected to a line of fluid. When Luke entered, his eyes fluttered open, just a little. No fear, just recognition. And for the first time, Luke saw something deeper in them: trust. On the counter was a paper with a treatment estimate. Luke picked it up and scanned the numbers. He knew he couldn't do it alone. He didn't want to ask for help, but he wasn't going to lose this dog. So he took a breath and asked, "If I started a fundraiser or something, would you be okay working with payments?" Dr. Elkins nodded. "If you're serious, we'll make it work. Shadow deserves that." Luke reached out and touched the dog's paw gently. He said, "He does. And so do I." That night, Luke didn't go back to the woods. He parked behind the clinic with permission and slept in the truck again. But this time, he wasn't alone in the dark. He scrolled through his phone, shaking hands tapping out a post with the photo he'd taken days ago. The caption was simple: "Bought this dog for $1. Trying to save his life now. Any help means the world." He hesitated, then hit post. For the first time in years, he was asking for something. And it terrified him. By morning, the post had been shared over 100 times. Comments trickled in, some kind, some skeptical. But what shocked Luke most were the donations. $5 from a woman in Ohio. 10 from a veteran in Arizona who said he once had a dog just like Shadow. Even $20 from a teenager who wrote, "You're doing something good. Keep going." Luke stared at the screen, blinking back tears. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was a start. And that was more than he'd had in a long time. Dr. Elkins greeted him with coffee and a cautious smile. "He's holding steady," she said. "Eating a little. Slept through the night." Luke followed her back to the exam room, where Shadow now sat up, groggy but alert. The tail didn't wag, but the eyes were different, more present. Luke crouched beside him, rubbing the side of his neck. "Hey, tough guy," he whispered. "People out there care about you. Crazy, right?" Shadow blinked slowly and leaned into his hand. Luke felt something shift in his chest, like part of him was waking up. The clinic gave them a bag of meds and instructions. "He needs rest. Keep him warm. Keep him close. And if anything changes, you call me, okay?" Dr. Elkins was firm but warm. Luke nodded, cradling Shadow in his arms again. They walked out together, stepping into a weak midday sun. This time, Shadow didn't resist. He nestled into Luke's jacket like he belonged there. People in the waiting room watched them go, some whispering. One little girl waved. Shadow didn't notice, but Luke did. It mattered. Back at the truck, Luke spread out the blanket and helped Shadow settle in. "All right," he muttered. "We got meds, a couple $100, and zero idea what comes next." He exhaled slowly. "But we've come this far." He made a vow right there, not just to help Shadow survive, but to keep going himself. No more drifting. No more hiding behind excuses. He didn't know how long they could make it, but he wasn't letting go. Not now. He called a friend from high school, a mechanic who owed him a favor. "You still got that old camper sitting behind the shop?" There was a pause, then a chuckle. "You want it. You gotta haul it." "It's ugly as sin." Luke grinned. "Ugly's fine. I just needed to keep a dog alive." 2 hours later, they were pulling the dented, mildew-scented camper into a small RV park on the outskirts of town. It had no AC, no working stove, but it was shelter. And for Shadow, that was everything. They settled in fast. Luke laid out towels for bedding and kept a close eye on Shadow's meds. The dog slept most of the time, in deep, twitching dreams. But when he woke, he always looked for Luke, eyes scanning the room until he found him. Luke talked to him constantly, about nothing and everything. "I used to think I was meant to do big things," he'd say. "Now I think maybe I'm just supposed to do this, stay, try, be better." Shadow never answered, but his presence did. Over the next few days, something strange happened. The fundraiser exploded. A woman from the town newspaper had seen the post and written a small article titled, "The $1 Dog Who Changed a Life." Then the local news picked it up. By the end of the week, Luke had over $2,000 in donations and messages from strangers across the country. People offered supplies, food, even vet care. One woman wrote, "You're giving me hope I didn't know I needed." But not everyone understood. At the RV park, one man scoffed, "You sleeping in a trailer for a mutt. You could have just let it die, man." Luke didn't argue. He just nodded and walked away. But inside, he felt the old shame trying to crawl back in. That fear that he was foolish, that this whole thing was temporary. Still, every time Shadow looked at him, the doubt faded. Because this wasn't about logic anymore. It was about something deeper, something sacred. One night, Shadow had a seizure, small but terrifying. Luke held him through it, whispering, "Stay with me." When it passed, Shadow collapsed in his lap, panting. Luke rocked him gently, heart hammering. "Okay," he said. "You're okay now." He didn't sleep that night, afraid it might happen again. But by dawn, Shadow was up again, limping around the camper like nothing had happened, resilient, relentless, just like Luke. That morning, Luke made a decision. No more waiting. No more surviving. He was going to rebuild, starting now. He pulled out his phone and called the local feed store. "You hiring?" he asked. "I'll do anything. Stocking, sweeping, whatever." The voice on the other end hesitated, then said, "Come by this afternoon. We'll talk." It wasn't much, but it was something. And Luke knew that as long as Shadow kept fighting, so would he. Because he hadn't just bought a dog that day at the auction. He'd bought a reason to care again, a reason to wake up. And every step since every pill, every hour spent watching over Shadow wasn't just about saving him. It was about saving himself. The feed store job turned into more than Luke expected. It started with sweeping floors and unloading sacks of grain, but the manager, a wiry woman named Carol, quickly noticed how customers stayed longer when Luke was around. Maybe it was his quiet presence, or maybe it was the way he talked about Shadow without shame. Either way, within a week, he was helping customers with pet food questions, organizing shelves, and even learning how to do basic inventory. He hadn't held a steady job in almost a year, but here, he started to feel needed again. Every day, Luke brought Shadow to the store. Carol let the dog lie behind the counter on a folded blanket, with a water bowl and a chew toy someone had donated. Customers asked about him constantly. Some even came just to see the $1 dog. Children would crouch beside him and whisper stories. Older folks left treats on the desk. Shadow, once afraid of any touch, now allowed gentle strokes and soft greetings. He was still wary of sudden movement, but his tail would sometimes lift in a shy, slow wag. Like trust, returning in layers. One afternoon, a woman walked in with tears in her eyes. She was in her 70s, clutching a faded photo of a dog. "He looked just like him," she said. "Mine passed away last Christmas. I didn't think I'd be able to love another." But seeing Shadow, she didn't finish the sentence. She just sat on the floor beside him for 15 minutes, crying softly while Shadow rested his chin on her knee. Luke didn't interrupt. He just watched, heart aching in a way that felt full, not empty. Shadow wasn't just healing, he was healing others. But it wasn't all easy. Shadow's health was still fragile. Some mornings, his leg refused to support him. Some nights, the tremors came back, faint but frightening. Luke kept a calendar of meds and checkups, and Dr. Elkins remained involved. She became more than a vet, she became a guide. "He's improving," she said, after a month. "But this is a long road. He'll never be perfect," Luke nodded. "Neither will I," she smiled, tapping Shadow's file. "Perfect's overrated." Luke used the fundraiser money carefully: vet bills, dog food, repairs to the old camper. He even fixed the heater with help from a neighbor. But as the money slowly dwindled, something else grew: community. Strangers offered help without being asked. One man dropped off a used dog bed. Another woman slipped Luke a 20 and said, "For the hero who didn't look away." Luke never saw himself that way, but he held the words close. Because in truth, he'd needed to believe he could be someone better. In mid-April, Luke took Shadow to a local park. It was a bright, breezy day, and for the first time, Shadow walked a full loop without needing to be carried. His gait was awkward, and the legs still dragged slightly, but he walked on his own. Children played nearby, kites fluttered in the sky, and Luke felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. A man at a picnic table recognized them. "You're the guy from the dog story, right?" Luke nodded, unsure how to respond. "You did good," the man said simply, "real good." Later that week, the local animal shelter invited Luke to speak at a fundraiser. He didn't think he had anything worth saying, but he agreed. When the night came, he stood in front of a small crowd, hands trembling. "I bought Shadow for $1, he began. "But he's worth more than anything I've ever owned." He paused. "I didn't save him, not really. He gave me something to care about when I'd stopped caring about myself." The room was silent. Then someone clapped. Then others. A standing ovation for a man who'd once slept in his truck, lost and invisible. After the event, a local news anchor approached Luke. "Would you mind if we did a feature on your story? People need to hear it." Luke hesitated. He wasn't used to being seen. But then he glanced at Shadow, curled at his feet, eyes calm and steady. And he nodded. "If it helps even one person choose to stay, let's do it." The interview aired the following week, and the response was overwhelming. Letters poured in, messages from strangers who'd lost pets, lost parents, lost hope. But not all attention was kind. A man from Luke's past showed up at the store, a former friend who had once offered him a couch to crash on, then kicked him out when things got hard. "So now you're some kind of saint 'cause you bought a dog," he sneered. "You still owe me $200. Luke stood his ground. "I'm not a saint. But I'm not that guy anymore either." Carol stepped in, her voice sharp. "And you can take your bitterness elsewhere." The man left, but the encounter rattled Luke. Not because he felt ashamed, but because it didn't break him. That night, he sat beside Shadow in the camper and whispered, "You were the first thing I didn't run from. And I think that saved me more than I knew." Shadow looked up at him, eyes soft in the low light. For the first time, he leaned forward and licked Luke's hand. A simple act, but to Luke, it felt like a ceremony. A confirmation. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was healing. They both were. And something told him the best was still to come. Weeks turned into months, and the change in both man and dog was undeniable. Shadow's fur, once patchy and dull, had grown back in thick along his back and chest, a warm mix of black and rust. He still limped, always would, but the limp no longer defined him. At the feed store, customers now greeted him like a coworker. One boy drew a crayon picture of Shadow with a cape and wrote, "Shadow the Brave." Carol pinned it on the bulletin board by the register, next to adoption flyers and handwritten thank you notes. Luke found himself working full-time, then managing deliveries, then ordering stock. With every new responsibility, his confidence grew. The Luke who had once avoided mirrors now looked people in the eye. And each night, after locking up, he'd head back to the little camper where Shadow waited, tail thumping. They had a rhythm now: dinner, a walk, then quiet. In those silent moments, Luke often thought about what almost didn't happen. One missed turn, one moment of hesitation, and none of this would have existed. The news story had gone further than anyone expected. A rescue group in Oregon reached out, asking to partner with Luke and document his journey. "You're what people need to see right now," their email read. Luke didn't feel like a symbol, but he agreed. He filmed short videos with Shadow, some serious, some lighthearted. One showed Shadow's first time playing with a ball. Another showed Luke talking about mental health. "This dog gave me purpose when I had none," he said into the camera. "You never know what a second chance can look like." Reactions flooded in. A man from Michigan messaged to say he was canceling plans to give away his senior dog. A woman in Kansas said she checked herself into a clinic because of one of Luke's videos. "If you could turn it around," she wrote, "maybe I can too." Luke responded to every message he could. Some days it overwhelmed him, but mostly, it humbled him. Because he never meant to be anything other than a guy trying to do right by a broken dog. That was still his only goal. Shadow continued to improve. His seizures stopped entirely after a medication adjustment, and Dr. Elkins declared him stable. "He's older than we thought," she said one afternoon. 7, maybe 8. "But I'll tell you what, I've never seen a comeback like this." Luke smiled, scratching Shadow behind the ears. He said, "He's got heart." Dr. Elkins nodded slowly. "So do you?" Luke didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence between them said enough. One day, Carol handed Luke an envelope after closing. "From the owner," she said. Inside was a letter offering him permanent employment and the chance to manage a new pet supply annex being built on the edge of town. "If you want it," the note read, "it's yours." Luke sat in the truck for a long time, staring at the paper. Shadow sat beside him, panting softly, as if waiting for the verdict. Luke laughed, shook his head, and said, "Guess we're sticking around, huh?" Shadow pressed his nose to Luke's arm. That was answer enough. Luke used some of the leftover fundraiser money to buy an old second-hand trailer from a retired couple nearby. It wasn't fancy, but it had a working stove, a porch, and two beds, one for him, one for Shadow. Moving in felt like stepping into a new chapter. He hung the crayon picture from the feed store above the kitchen table. Outside, he built a little ramp for Shadow to come and go easier. And every evening, they sat on the porch together, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The community kept showing up. A group of teens from a local school built a fence around Luke's new yard as a service project. Someone anonymously dropped off a bag of premium dog food with a note, "For the dog who reminds us to keep going." Luke began volunteering at the shelter on weekends, helping other rescued dogs adjust. He wasn't a therapist, a vet, or a hero. But he showed up. And sometimes, that was enough. Late one evening, Luke got a call from a woman in crisis. She'd seen his video, recognized the desperation in his voice. "I was going to give up tonight," she said, her voice cracking. "But then I watched your story again. And I couldn't. I just couldn't." Luke didn't know what to say, he just listened. And after the call ended, he sat in the dark for a long time, Shadow's head resting on his foot. There were no words for that kind of moment, only the weight of it. The responsibility, the grace, and so, transformation came quietly. Not with fanfare or speeches, but through small rituals filling Shadow's bowl, answering messages, showing up to work. Luke no longer felt like a failure. He felt accountable, rooted, alive. The broken parts of him hadn't vanished. But they'd been welded into something stronger. Something honest, something whole. Shadow was no longer just the $1 dog. He was a living monument to resilience, a reflection of the man who refused to walk away. Together, they'd built a life that no one saw coming. A life that mattered, a life worth fighting for. By summer, the new annex at the feed store opened its doors with Luke officially in charge. The space was bright, filled with shelves of carefully chosen pet supplies, handmade toys, and adoption flyers pinned to corkboards. On opening day, Shadow lay in his usual spot behind the counter, a small employee of the month sign next to his bed. Dozens of families came by just to see him. Kids brought drawings, older couples brought treats. Shadow greeted each visitor with calm acceptance, his tail giving quiet wags like punctuation to a story still unfolding. Luke had added a sign above the register, simple, wooden, hand-painted, "Second chances welcome." He never expected it to mean so much to so many. Some came in for dog food and ended up staying just to talk. Others asked about rescue groups, about volunteering, about recovery. "You're building more than a store," Carol told him one day, stopping in with coffee. "You're building something that keeps people going." Luke just smiled and nodded, brushing his hand over Shadow's head. He still didn't know how to respond to praise. But he felt it. He believed it now. The trailer had become a home. Luke planted a small garden out front, mostly tomatoes and peppers. Shadow had a bed on the porch and a ramp that led to a shaded patch under a tree, where he liked to lie and watch squirrels. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. Luke started cooking again, slowly learning to make real meals instead of heating cans on a camping stove. Most nights ended on the porch with Shadow by his side and the sky full of quiet stars. Sometimes neighbors would join. Sometimes it was just them. Either way, it was enough. Luke never forgot the harder days. He didn't want to. He spoke openly about them now on social media, at shelter fundraisers, even in a small TEDx talk he was invited to give. "I thought I had to be perfect to matter," he said to the audience. "But I learned that being present was enough. That showing up, especially when it's hard, is how healing begins." Shadow taught me that. After the event, a man in his 50s approached him with tears in his eyes and said, "You saved me tonight." Luke didn't reply. He just hugged him. A documentary crew reached out soon after. They'd seen the clips, heard the story, and wanted to make a short film about Luke and Shadow's journey. At first, Luke hesitated, but then he remembered how many people had reached out over the months, saying they'd seen themselves in him. In Shadow, in the silence between them. So he agreed. The filming was quiet, respectful. They followed Luke at work, on walks, and during vet checkups. The final scene showed him kneeling beside Shadow, whispering, "We're not done yet." Shadow had his ups and downs. His leg never fully healed, but he learned to work with it. The seizures stayed away. His eyes, once dim, now shone with recognition and calm. At his next vet visit, Dr. Elkins ran her hand down his back and said, "He's got a few good years left." "Maybe more," Luke smiled, a lump in his throat. "We'll make him count." They always knew time was fragile, but they'd learned how to fill it with meaning. Letters still arrived every week. Handwritten ones, emails, messages on social media. A teenager from Maine said he named his dog Shadow after watching the videos. A woman in hospice care wrote, "I play your story every morning. It reminds me to look for beauty, even in endings." Luke saved every letter. Some were pinned on the trailer wall. Others he kept in a box marked proof. Proof that pain could become purpose. That what felt small could ripple wide. The The shelter where Luke had first spoken now had a growing volunteer list. Inspired by Shadow's story, they started a program called Dollar Dogs to help hard-to-adopt pets find homes. Every dog adopted came with a small tag engraved with the words, "I was chosen." Luke visited often, sometimes bringing Shadow, sometimes just staying to help with intake. He didn't need recognition, he just needed to give back. Because he knew what it meant to be given a chance when you were at your lowest. One weekend, the town hosted a pet festival, and Luke was asked to be the guest of honor. He almost said no to public, too loud. But he thought about the people who'd never heard their story, the ones still hurting, so he said yes. That day, on a small stage surrounded by booths and laughter and barking dogs, Luke held the mic in shaky hands and said, "You never know what saving one soul will do. It won't fix the world, but it just might fix yours." It did for me. When the applause came, Shadow stood at Luke's feet, leaning against his leg like always. And in that moment, simple, sunlit, and full of life, Luke realized something that stole his breath. He didn't just have a second chance. He was someone else's second chance too, a man who showed what redemption could look like. Quiet, committed, whole. The season shifted once more, bringing cooler nights and golden leaves falling like quiet prayers. Shadow moved slower now, but with grace. His limp had become part of his rhythm. Luke adjusted their routine: shorter walks, softer food, longer porch evenings with music playing low on an old speaker. Shadow would rest his head on Luke's foot, sighing deeply, like he finally knew he was home. "You and me," Luke would say softly. "That's all we ever needed." And somehow, even in the silence, Shadow seemed to agree. In October, a young couple adopted a nervous rescue mutt from the shelter's Dollar Dogs program. The dog had been there nearly a year, scared of loud voices and quick hands. Luke met them at the store afterward, helped them find the right food, the right leash, the gentlest harness. As they left, the woman said, "We never would have picked him before, but then we saw your story. And we realized he's not broken, just waiting." Luke didn't say anything right away. He just smiled, looked at Shadow, and whispered, "That's what they said about you." Shadow began sleeping more, choosing soft corners with sunlight and blankets. Luke learned to read the small signs: stiffness in the mornings, reluctance on cold days, the way he looked at him a beat longer before lying down. They had a vet plan, they had options, but more than anything, they had time. Time Luke refused to waste. Each day became intentional. Meals were shared, naps were sacred, and every evening ended the same. Shadow curled next to him, safe. A local school invited Luke to speak to a class of teenagers about responsibility, kindness, and rescue. He walked in wearing a faded flannel and work boots, Shadow by his side in a harness with a patch that read Survivor. He spoke not about rules, but about choices. "You don't have to do something huge," he told them. "Just one thing that says I won't turn away." That's how healing starts. When he finished, one boy raised his hand and said, "I think I'm gonna rescue a dog when I'm older." Luke nodded, eyes damp. That's how it begins. Back at the trailer, Luke started writing in a journal. Nothing fancy, just memories. He wanted to capture the details: Shadow's first tail wag, the quiet vet visit, the moment in the woods when he made the decision to act. "You deserve to be remembered," he wrote one night, watching Shadow snore. "Not just for what you survived, but for what you taught." He didn't know if anyone would ever read it. But it didn't matter. It was for them. It was real. The day Shadow turned 9 estimated. Not exact. Luke threw a small gathering at the store. A few close friends, Carol, Dr. Elkins, and 3 adopted dogs who had come through the Dollar Dogs program. Shadow wore a birthday bandana and ate a special vet-approved cake. He didn't move much, but he sat proudly, ears alert, soaking in the affection. Luke gave a short toast, voice catching in his throat. "This dog saved me. Not with tricks or training, but with presence. With endurance." He never gave up, and because of him, neither did I. That night, as the party ended and the store emptied, Luke sat alone with Shadow under the stars. He reached into his jacket and pulled out something small, a worn, faded auction tag. "I kept it," he said quietly. $1. That's what they said you were worth." He tore it in half and let the wind carry it. They were wrong. Shadow didn't move, but Luke saw the light in his eyes, still there, still shining. And he smiled. "You didn't just come back. You brought me with you." In late November, Luke launched a nonprofit, the Shadow Project. Its mission was simple: to fund vet care for overlooked rescue animals and support people in recovery who adopted them. Donations came fast thanks to the story's reach. They set up a small scholarship for shelter volunteers and created a network of local fosters. For every pet adopted, they included a card that read, "This animal has already beaten the odds. Now it's your turn to believe." Luke knew what belief could do. He'd lived it. One cold December morning, Luke woke to find Shadow watching him, alert but tired. He wasn't in pain, just slow. Luke lay beside him on the floor, wrapped them both in a quilt, and whispered stories. The auction, the truck, the first bite of food, the seizure, the park walk, the porch, all of it. "You've done enough," he whispered. "If you're ready, I'll understand." Shadow rested his head on Luke's chest. No sound, no cry, just peace. Shadow passed in his sleep that night, wrapped in Luke's arms. The next day, the feed store closed early. A sign was placed on the door, "In honor of Shadow, we'll be back tomorrow." "Today, we remember." Flowers appeared on the steps, letters, drawings. The shelter lit a candle. A boy brought a stuffed dog and placed it under the porch. Luke didn't speak much. He just sat there, holding Shadow's collar, listening to the wind. And when someone asked what they could do, he finally said, "Adopt. Show up. Keep going." Luke buried Shadow under the crooked pine tree where they'd first camped, where it all began. He carved a stone marker himself, hands shaking. It read, "Shadow, the dog who stayed. One life. Infinite love." People came quietly, left tokens, whispered thanks. But Luke didn't need the words. He carried the legacy with him now, in every moment, every gesture, every soul he helped along the way. He didn't just save a dog, he found himself, and through Shadow, a broken man remembered how to live.